The night I realized my daughter no longer saw me as her mother, she was smiling into a camera with a glass of champagne in her hand. Her husband was beside her. My granddaughter was curled against her shoulder in matching Christmas pajamas. Soft piano music played in the background while strangers flooded the comments with things like beautiful family and goals, and your mother must be so proud. I was proud. God help me, I was proud right up until the moment Claire laughed and said, "Honestly, the old ATM finally stopped spitting cash." Everyone in the room laughed with her. Not nervous laughter, not uncomfortable laughter, the kind of laughter people use when they feel safe enough to be cruel. Then Jason raised his bourbon and said, "We should have gotten more out of her before retirement." And my daughter, my only child, laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. That was the moment something inside me went still. Not shattered, not exploded, still. Because there comes a point in life when pain stops sounding dramatic. It simply becomes quiet, cold, precise. I sat there alone in my kitchen with my phone glowing in my hand, while the people I had spent 40 years loving talked about me like expired equipment. And what they didn't know that night was that I had already paid for almost every beautiful thing visible in that video. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 63 years old, a retired pediatric nurse, widowed for 4 years, and until recently I would have done absolutely anything for my daughter. That evening had started like hundreds before it. I'd made myself chamomile tea, fed the neighbor's cat that wandered onto my porch every night around 7, and settled into my recliner with a blanket over my knees, while Vermont disappeared beneath another December snowfall. The house had been quieter since Richard died. Not empty, exactly. Empty implies something waiting to be filled. My house wasn't waiting for anything anymore. It simply existed around me like an old companion that had learned how to grieve in silence. I usually avoided social media. Most of it felt exhausting, too loud, too polished, too desperate to prove happiness. But Claire lived online. Her entire career depended on it. Lifestyle partnerships, parenting content, home decor, sponsorships. She documented every inch of her life with professional lighting and carefully staged authenticity. Sometimes I watched her videos because it made me feel included. That night she'd posted something titled "A Cozy Family Christmas Evening." I remember smiling before I even clicked on it. The video opened with Lily decorating cookies at the kitchen island while Jason pretended to steal frosting from the bowl. Claire wore cream-colored loungewear that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Their kitchen glowed with soft golden lighting, and for a moment I felt the familiar ache of missing Richard beside me. This was what we'd worked for all those years, wasn't it? A comfortable life for our daughter, security, stability, family. Then the camera shifted. Claire must have thought she'd stopped recording because the angle dipped sideways toward the marble countertop. The image blurred slightly while voices continued in the background. At first I barely paid attention. Then I heard my name. "Did she finally transfer the money for January?" Jason asked. Claire snorted. "No. The old ATM finally stopped spitting cash." Laughter exploded across the room. My fingers tightened around the phone. Jason said, "Honestly, we should have gotten more out of her before retirement." Someone else asked, "Wait, she still pays your bills?" Claire answered casually like she was discussing grocery coupons instead of her mother's life savings. Not all of them, just enough to keep things comfortable. Another laugh. Then came the sentence I still hear sometimes when the house gets too quiet. "She'd rather help us than admit nobody actually wants to spend time with a lonely old woman." More laughter. I watched my daughter lift her wine glass with a smile on her face while my stomach slowly folded in on itself. It wasn't only the cruelty, it was the ease of it. No hesitation, no guilt, no awareness that they were discussing a human being who had once worked 16-hour shifts to keep Claire clothed and fed after Richard's construction business nearly collapsed during the recession. I replayed the video 3 times, not because I thought I'd misunderstood, because I wanted to make absolutely certain there was no kindness hidden between the words. There wasn't. Outside my windows, snow drifted softly across the dark yard Richard used to shovel before I even woke up in the mornings. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked steadily through the silence, while I sat frozen in my chair with cold tea untouched beside me. My mind began pulling numbers from memory without permission. $22,000 for Claire's college loans after graduate school. $30,000 toward their wedding. $50,000 for the down payment on their house. Monthly transfers after Jason's temporary business setback stretched into 3 years. Private tuition for Lily. emergency credit card bailouts, car repairs, vacation deposits, medical deductibles, streaming subscriptions I didn't even know I was still paying. Piece by piece, memory rearranged itself into something uglier than sacrifice. Dependency. Not once had I kept score before that night. Parents aren't supposed to. At least that's what I always believed. Richard used to tell me I confused love with rescuing people, and I'd laugh because helping Claire felt natural to me. She was my daughter. That simple truth had guided almost every major decision of my adult life. But sitting there in the dim glow of Christmas lights, I realized something horrifying. My daughter no longer saw my love as a gift. She saw it as infrastructure. Something permanent, predictable, automatic. Like electricity in the walls. I don't remember going upstairs. One moment I was in the living room and the next I was standing in my bathroom staring at my reflection beneath the soft yellow vanity light. I looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just tired. The kind of tired that settles into women who spend decades making everyone else comfortable. I heard Richard's voice in my memory then, calm as always. You keep handing people pieces of yourself and acting surprised when they expect more. At the time I'd accused him of being cynical. Now I wondered if he'd simply seen clearly. Claire texted me 20 minutes later. Hey Mom, don't forget Lily's tuition is due Friday. No mention of the video. No apology. Just another withdrawal request disguised as affection. I stared at the message for a very long time before locking my phone and setting it face down on the counter. Then I walked downstairs, turned off the Christmas tree lights one by one, and sat alone in the dark, listening to the wind push softly against the windows. I didn't cry. That's the strange thing. People imagine heartbreak as dramatic. Tears, screaming, collapse. But some betrayals arrive too quietly for that. Some simply remove the last illusion keeping your heart warm. Around midnight I opened my banking app. For the first time in nearly 15 years, I looked at every recurring transfer attached to my daughter's life. And for the first time since becoming a mother, I asked myself a question I should have asked years earlier. What happens when the person you sacrificed everything for only loves the sacrifice? For most of my life I believed love and sacrifice were supposed to look identical. You gave without counting. You helped without hesitation. You showed up before people even needed to ask. That was how Richard and I raised Claire. That was how we survived 38 years of marriage, 2 recessions, 1 cancer diagnosis, and the 1,000 invisible hardships that quietly shape ordinary families. You carried each other. At least that was the story I told myself. The morning after I watched that video, I woke before sunrise with the same heavy stillness lodged inside my chest. Snow pressed against the windows in thick white layers, muting the world outside, until the entire neighborhood looked wrapped in cotton. I lay in bed listening to the old radiator hiss softly beneath the windowsill and realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, I did not want to call my daughter. Usually Claire was the first thing I thought about in the mornings. Whether Lily needed winter boots, whether Jason had found stable work yet, whether their mortgage situation had improved. My mind moved toward them automatically the way water finds familiar cracks. But that morning there was only silence. Not anger. Anger burns hot. This felt colder than that. I got up slowly, tied my robe around my waist, and made coffee in the kitchen while darkness still hung over the trees behind the house. Richard used to say Vermont mornings felt ancient in winter, like the world hadn't fully decided whether to wake up yet. I stood at the sink holding my mug while snow drifted sideways across the yard and forced myself to look honestly at something I'd spent years avoiding. Claire and Jason were not struggling. They were dependent. There's a difference. Struggling people look for stability. Dependent people look for the next rescue. And somehow, over the years, I had confused the two. I carried my coffee into Richard's old study and opened the cabinet where we kept household files. Tax returns, insurance paperwork, property records. The ordinary bones of a life built carefully over decades. I found my checkbook register first, then folders, then statements. By 9 a.m, papers covered almost every surface in the room. The numbers were staggering when viewed all at once. Not because Richard and I had been wealthy, we weren't, but because sacrifice compounds quietly over time. 1,000 small rescues become entire lives built on your exhaustion before you realize what's happened. Claire's graduate school debt had started it. I still remembered the night she called crying from Boston, terrified about student loans piling up while she tried building a marketing career after college. "I can't breathe, Mom," she'd whispered over the phone. "I feel like I'm drowning." Richard wanted her to consolidate the loans herself and learn budgeting properly. I told him she was overwhelmed and still young. 2 weeks later, I mailed the first check. Then came the wedding. Claire wanted a vineyard ceremony in Connecticut with white roses hanging from iron arches and string quartets beneath heated tents because several guests didn't tolerate cold well. Richard nearly choked when he saw the estimate. Claire cried again. Jason promised they'd repay us eventually. They never mentioned repayment after the honeymoon. Then the house. That one should have opened my eyes. Jason called one Sunday afternoon explaining they'd found the perfect family home, but needed help with the down payment before another buyer stepped in. I still remember Richard standing silently at the kitchen counter while I listened to Jason explain why timing was critical. When I hung up, Richard looked at me for a long moment and asked quietly, "Do they want a home or a lifestyle?" I hated that question because part of me already knew the answer. Still, I transferred the money. $50,000 disappeared from our retirement savings in less than 3 minutes. Claire sent flowers afterward with a card that read, "Couldn't have done it without you." At the time it felt loving. Now it read differently in my memory. More transactional somehow, like gratitude carefully polished for presentation. Around noon I found the folder labeled Family Support. My stomach tightened. Richard had started documenting everything 3 years before he died. Every transfer, every loan, every recurring expense. Each page carried his small neat handwriting in blue ink. March Claire overdraft coverage. April Jason business debt assistance. June Lily tuition contribution. September emergency credit settlement. December holiday travel reimbursement. The pages continued and continued and continued. I sat back slowly in Richard's leather chair, while sunlight crept weakly across the study floor. He'd known. Not everything perhaps, but enough. Enough to start keeping records. A strange sadness settled over me, then not only for myself but for him too. Richard had carried these concerns quietly while I continued insisting our daughter simply needed temporary help. Temporary had stretched across 15 years. I reached the final pages and noticed something odd. Certain entries were marked with tiny stars. Beside one of them, Richard had written, "Eleanor still believes love can fix entitlement." Another, "Claire only calls when she needs emotional reassurance or money." Usually both. I closed the folder immediately. The words hurt because they were true. Not entirely true. Claire loved me in her own way, I think. But somewhere along the line, love had become tangled together with access. Financial access, emotional access, constant rescue access. And I had allowed it because motherhood can become addictive that way. Being needed feels dangerously close to being valued. My phone buzzed on the desk. "Claire!" For one stupid moment, hope lifted inside me. Some foolish part of my heart thought maybe she'd realized the video had uploaded incorrectly. Maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe there was still something salvageable hiding underneath all this. I answered quietly, "Hello." "Mom, thank God." Claire sounded distracted, not emotional. "Quick question, did you switch banks or something?" I said nothing. "The tuition transfer didn't go through this morning." There was noise in the background, cabinet doors, Jason talking somewhere farther away. Claire sighed impatiently. "Mom." I looked down at the pages scattered across Richard's desk. Every sacrifice, every bailout, every year spent confusing generosity with love. Then I heard Jason's muffled voice in the background. "Ask her about the insurance payment too." Something inside me hardened another degree. Not dramatically, just enough. "I'll look into it," I said calmly. "Okay, good," Claire replied, immediately relieved now that the problem was being handled. I knew it had to be some kind of error. Before hanging up, she added casually, "Oh, and Lily's dance tuition comes out next week too." Then she ended the call. "No, how are you?" No apology. No acknowledgement of the video. Only withdrawals. I lowered the phone slowly and stared at the snow drifting beyond Richard's study windows. Then I opened the banking portal again. One by one I began making changes. Richard had been dead for 4 years, but that afternoon, sitting alone in his study with snow pressing softly against the windows, I felt closer to him than I had in months. Not because of grief. Because for the first time I was finally seeing what he had tried so gently to warn me about. The house creaked quietly around me while I worked through the banking accounts one by one. Most people imagine life-changing decisions arriving with drama-slammed doors, raised voices, some grand emotional declaration. But the truth is, entire relationships can shift in absolute silence. All it takes is one person deciding they're done being used. The first thing I canceled was the emergency backup credit card attached to Claire's household expenses. I'd opened it 8 years earlier after Lily was born prematurely. Claire had called me sobbing from the hospital because insurance delays were creating temporary billing issues. At least that's how she explained it at the time. Just until we stabilized, she'd promised. Stabilize. That word had followed me through nearly a decade of financial exhaustion. The customer service representative sounded cheerful while closing the account. "Would you like to notify authorized users immediately?" she asked. I stared out at the snow-covered maple trees behind the house. "No," I said quietly, "they'll figure it out." Next came the luxury SUV insurance policy. Then the streaming subscriptions bundled through my account. Then the monthly tuition transfer for Lily's private academy. That one hurt. Not because Claire deserved the money, but because Lily deserved consistency. For a moment I almost stopped. My granddaughter's face flashed through my mind, her missing front tooth, the way she still curled against my side during movie nights, the tiny knitted scarf she'd made for me last winter because Grandma gets colder now. Children always become collateral damage when adults build relationships around manipulation. I hated that part most of all. Still, I finalized the cancellation. By evening, I felt strangely exhausted, as if I'd spent the entire day lifting heavy furniture alone. Not guilty, exactly, just emotionally out of practice. Boundaries use muscles some women never learn to develop. Around 6 o'clock, my phone lit up. Claire calling. I let it ring. 30 seconds later, she called again. Then again. Finally, a text appeared. "Mom, something's wrong with the school payment." I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter and continued chopping carrots for soup. The silence that followed surprised me. Not hers, mine. Normally, her distress would have ignited immediate panic inside me. I would have rushed to fix things before she even fully explained the problem. But now I moved calmly through my kitchen, listening to the soft rhythm of my knife against the cutting board, while snow thickened outside the windows. Another message arrived. "The insurance company says our coverage was canceled." Then another. "Mom, this isn't funny." I almost laughed at that. Funny. As though refusing to finance 2 grown adults somehow qualified as cruelty. I stirred the soup slowly, while memories drifted through my mind, not dramatic ones, just small humiliations I'd ignored for years, because acknowledging them would have forced me to confront the larger truth. Claire rolling her eyes when I asked simple questions about their finances. Jason joking at Thanksgiving that I was basically their silent investor. The way Claire only visited consistently when bills were due. The endless stream of emergencies always requiring immediate money but never long-term accountability. Richard saw it long before I did. Toward the end of his life, he'd grown quieter whenever Claire called. Not angry, just careful. One night, about 6 months before the cancer took him, we were lying in bed while rain tapped softly against the roof. Claire had just borrowed another $7,000 for unexpected renovations. Richard stared at the ceiling for a long time before speaking. "You know what scares me most?" he asked quietly. I turned toward him. "What?" "That someday you'll have nothing left to give them except your dignity." At the time, I'd accused him of being harsh. Now his words sat inside my chest like stones. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jason. I considered ignoring it, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" "What exactly is going on?" he demanded immediately. No greeting. No concern. Just irritation. I lowered the stove heat beneath the soup pot. "Good evening to you too, Jason." A sharp exhale came through the phone. "Claire's freaking out over here. The school called, the insurance got canceled, credit payments are bouncing." I leaned against the kitchen counter. Interesting. Not once had either of them asked whether I was okay. Not after the video. Not after weeks of emotional distance. Only now, when money stopped flowing, did panic finally appear. "I'm reorganizing some things financially," I said evenly. "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm retired." That doesn't explain this. There it was again. This absolute certainty that my resources belonged to them. I closed my eyes briefly. "You and Claire are adults." Silence. Then Jason laughed, once short and humorless. "So that's what this is. You're trying to punish us." The accusation settled over me strangely. Not because it hurt, but because for the first time I realized they genuinely believed access to my money was normal, expected, permanent. "No," I said softly, "I'm trying to stop disappearing." He didn't respond right away. In the background, I could hear Claire talking loudly, asking what I was saying. Finally, Jason lowered his voice. Look, if this is about you feeling unappreciated or something, I ended the call. Not dramatically, just quietly. Then I stood there in the warm kitchen listening to soup simmer while snow buried the driveway outside. For several minutes, the house remained perfectly still. And then something unexpected happened. Relief. Not joy. Not triumph. Relief. The kind that arrives when you finally stop carrying a weight you've mistaken for responsibility. That night I slept better than I had in years. The next morning I woke to sunlight reflecting across fresh snow and realized no one had contacted me overnight except Claire. 7 missed calls, 4 texts, 1 voicemail. I listened to the voicemail while making coffee. Claire sounded furious now. Mom, this is insane. Lily's school is threatening late fees. Jason's insurance app says the policy's inactive and my card just got declined at the grocery store. Call me back immediately. Immediately. I looked around my quiet kitchen. The old wooden table Richard built himself. The frost gathering softly at the window corners. The peaceful silence of a life no longer revolving around someone else's emergencies. Then I deleted the voicemail. Later that afternoon I drove into town and bought myself a new winter coat. Not because I needed one. Because for the first time in years I spent money without wondering who else might need it more. The first week without financially rescuing my daughter felt strangely unreal. Like stepping out of a noisy factory after years inside and suddenly realizing how loud the machinery had always been. The constant tension I'd carried for so long had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. The worrying, the budgeting around someone else's lifestyle, the anticipation of the next emergency disguised as temporary bad luck. Without it, my days felt unnaturally quiet. And quiet, I discovered, can be deeply uncomfortable when you've spent decades measuring your worth by how useful you are to other people. 3 days after canceling the transfers, I found myself standing in the frozen produce aisle at Hannaford's, staring at a display of oranges while wondering whether Claire had managed to pay Lily's tuition herself. Not because I planned to fix it. Because motherhood doesn't evaporate simply because your heart gets broken. I still worried automatically. That instinct remained. But now another thought existed beside it. Maybe they need to experience consequences. The realization felt almost shameful. I drove home through heavy gray skies with groceries in the back seat, and Richard's old jazz station humming softly through the speakers. Vermont roads in winter always looked lonely to me. Bare trees, frozen fences, smoke curling from distant chimneys like tired sighs against the sky. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a black SUV parked near the house. Claire's. For a moment, my pulse jumped. Then I saw the way the driver's side door slammed open. Not worried. Angry. Claire marched through the snow toward the porch, wearing an expensive cream-colored coat I remembered partially paying for last Christmas. Her boots crushed through fresh snow while she balanced her phone against her ear, still talking as she climbed the front steps. Yes, I know, Karen, she snapped into the phone. I'm handling it. She hung up before I even reached the front door. The moment I opened it, cold air rushed inside alongside my daughter's fury. What the hell is wrong with you? She demanded. No hello. No hug. Just rage. I stood there holding grocery bags while snowflakes melted against the shoulders of her coat. Good afternoon, Claire. Oh my God, don't do that calm voice right now. She brushed past me into the house without invitation. The school called twice. Jason had to miss work because the insurance got canceled. My card was declined in front of people yesterday. I closed the door quietly behind us. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and soup stock from lunch. Warm, peaceful. Claire's anger felt violent inside it. I'm retired, I said simply. That's not an explanation. It's the truth. She stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking another language. Mom, you can't just cut us off without warning. There it was again. Cut us off. Not stop helping. Not set boundaries. Like I'd interrupted a utility service they owned. I set the grocery bags down slowly on the kitchen counter. You and Jason are almost 40. Claire laughed sharply. Are you seriously doing this right now? Doing what? This martyr thing. Her voice rose louder. Pretending we used you when you offered to help. The sentence landed harder than I expected because technically she wasn't wrong. I had offered. Again and again and again. But offering support is not the same thing as surrendering your entire existence. Claire paced across the kitchen, agitated energy radiating off her in waves. She looked beautiful, even angry. Richard used to say she could walk into a room carrying chaos and somehow still look elegant doing it. You have any idea how humiliating this week has been? She demanded. People are asking questions. I watched her carefully then. Not once had she asked why I'd changed. Not once had she mentioned the video. Not once had she wondered if something hurt me deeply enough to finally walk away. Only embarrassment mattered. What people, I asked quietly. She hesitated. That tiny hesitation told me everything. Social media sponsors, friends, school parents, neighbors, the audience. Claire's entire adult identity depended on appearing successful, composed, enviable. Financial instability threatened the image she'd spent years constructing online. And suddenly I understood something Richard had tried desperately to explain before he died. Claire didn't just fear hardship. She feared losing status. "I can't believe you're doing this over one misunderstanding," she muttered. The room went still. Finally. There it was. I looked directly at her. "So you know about the video?" Color drained slightly from her face. For a brief moment I saw genuine panic beneath the anger. Then her expression hardened again. "You weren't supposed to see that." The sentence hit me harder than the insult itself. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We were drunk." Not, "I didn't mean it." You weren't supposed to see it. As though the betrayal mattered less than being caught. I leaned against the counter because suddenly I felt very tired. "You called me an old ATM. Claire rubbed both hands over her face. "Mom, it was a joke." "Was it?" "You're blowing this completely out of proportion." I thought about the laughter in that video, the ease of it, the years underneath it. "No," I said softly. "I think I finally understand the proportion." For a second something fragile crossed her face. Fear, maybe? Or guilt trying unsuccessfully to surface through layers of defensiveness. Then her phone buzzed. Instinctively she checked it. Even in the middle of this, I almost smiled at the absurdity. Claire noticed my expression and snapped the phone screen dark. "Jason thinks you're having some kind of breakdown," she said coldly. That one actually amused me. After decades of quietly financing their lives, the first act of self-preservation they'd ever seen from me apparently qualified as instability. "I'm not having a breakdown," I replied calmly. "I'm waking up." Silence stretched between us. Snow drifted softly beyond the kitchen windows while the old refrigerator hummed in the corner. Claire suddenly looked smaller to me. Not younger. Smaller. Like someone who'd spent so many years performing adulthood that she never fully became one. "You're really willing to hurt Lily over this?" she asked finally, voice trembling now. And there it was. The final weapon. Guilt through my granddaughter. Pain twisted sharply through my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "No, Claire. You're hurting Lily by building a life you can't afford without draining everyone around you." Her eyes filled instantly. Real tears this time. But even then, something inside me stayed cautious. Because tears are not always remorse. Sometimes they're panic wearing mascara. Claire grabbed her purse angrily. "Fine. If you want to destroy this family, go ahead. Destroy this family." Interesting choice of words from someone who'd mocked me publicly 4 nights earlier. She stormed toward the door, then stopped abruptly without turning around. "You know what Dad used to say about you?" she asked bitterly. "That you cared so much about being needed you'd let people walk all over you forever." The sentence stole the air from my lungs. Because Richard had said exactly that. Claire opened the door before I could respond. Cold wind swept into the house as she disappeared into the falling snow, and standing there alone in the sudden silence, I realized something terrifying. My husband hadn't just understood our daughter. He had understood me too. Family dinner was scheduled for Sunday at 6:30. Claire texted me the invitation Thursday night like she was organizing a corporate mediation. "We need to talk face to face. Jason agrees this has gone too far." Not, "Mom, can we fix this?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just damage control wrapped in polite formatting. I considered declining. By then, nearly 2 weeks had passed since I stopped financing their lives, and the effects were clearly spreading. Claire's social media posts had become noticeably less frequent. The polished restaurant photos disappeared first. Then the sponsored skincare videos. Then the weekend family outings. Perfection requires funding. And suddenly their perfect life was developing cracks. Part of me wanted to stay home Sunday night with a blanket and a book and let them collapse without my participation. But another part, the exhausted maternal part, still hoping for honesty, needed to hear them speak plainly at least once. So I agreed. Snow fell most of Sunday afternoon while I drove to their house just outside Burlington. The roads were slick with gray slush and bare branches clawed at the darkening sky overhead. I listened to silence during the drive instead of music. Richard used to hum while driving in winter. I missed that suddenly. Claire's house looked exactly the same when I pulled into the driveway. White lights wrapped neatly around porch railings, expensive wreath on the front door, warm golden windows glowing against the snow. The illusion remained intact from the outside. Jason opened the door before I could knock. "Hey," he said stiffly. No warmth. No hostility either. Just calculation. I stepped inside and immediately smelled rosemary chicken and candles that cost too much money. Claire had always believed expensive homes should smell curated. Lily ran into the foyer before anyone could stop her. "Grandma!" She threw herself against me so hard I nearly lost balance. Her little arms wrapped around my waist while her winter socks slid across the hardwood floor. For one painful second, everything inside me softened. I hugged her tightly. "Hi, sweetheart. You haven't come over in forever." The innocence in her voice nearly broke me. Claire appeared from the dining room carrying wine glasses. "Lily, honey, go finish your homework upstairs." "But now." Lily looked between us uncertainly before slowly disappearing toward the staircase. The moment she vanished upstairs, the atmosphere changed completely. Jason motioned toward the dining room. "Let's just sit." Dinner began with artificial politeness so strained it almost sounded theatrical. Claire complimented my coat. Jason poured wine nobody drank. Silverware clinked softly against expensive plates while tension spread across the table like invisible smoke. Finally, Claire set her fork down sharply. "Okay, we need to clear the air." There it was. Not apology. Management. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. Claire exhaled dramatically. "What you're doing is hurting everyone." "Everyone." "You know what I mean?" "No," I said quietly. "Actually, I don't." Jason leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "Look, Eleanor, nobody's saying mistakes weren't made." "Mistakes," I repeated. Claire groaned. "Mom, please don't do this." "Do what?" "Twist everything into something bigger." The calmness inside me surprised even myself. 2 months ago, this conversation would have destroyed me emotionally. I would have rushed to repair the tension before it fully surfaced. Now I simply watched them. Watched the panic beneath their irritation. Watched 2 adults terrified not of losing a relationship but of losing financial stability. Claire's voice sharpened. "You've completely abandoned us over one stupid joke." I looked directly at her. One stupid joke doesn't last 15 years. Silence. Outside, wind rattled softly against the windows. Jason cleared his throat. "You're acting like we never appreciated you." "You didn't." Claire's eyes widened slightly. Not because I'd yelled. Because I hadn't. Quiet truth unsettles people more than anger. "That's not fair," she snapped. "Isn't it? You offered to help us." "Yes," I agreed, and somewhere along the way helping turned into obligation. Claire shook her head in disbelief. "Parents are supposed to help their children." The sentence hung in the air. Then Jason added the line that finally stripped away the last illusion completely. "Honestly, most parents would be grateful their family still needs them." I stared at him. There it was. The philosophy underneath everything. Need equals love. Access equals value. Financial usefulness equals emotional relevance. I suddenly understood why Richard had become so quiet near the end of his life. He'd seen this coming. "You don't miss me," I said softly. Claire blinked. "What?" "You miss what I provided." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" My voice remained calm. "When was the last time either of you visited without needing something?" Neither answered. I continued gently, almost tired now. "When Richard died, I spent weeks barely sleeping." "Do you know what Claire texted me 3 days after the funeral?" Claire looked away immediately. I remembered it perfectly. "Mom, can you still help with the kitchen remodel deposit? Contractor says timing is critical." No pause for grief. No adjustment. Life simply continued billing me. "I was trying to survive losing my husband," I said quietly. "And you were worried about countertops." Claire's face flushed crimson. "That's not fair." "No," I replied. "What's unfair is spending 40 years loving people who discuss you like expired machinery." Jason suddenly pushed back his chair. "Jesus Christ, Eleanor, enough already." The irritation in his voice startled even Claire. "There it is," I murmured. "What? The real problem?" He crossed both arms tightly. "And what exactly is that?" "You thought I'd tolerate humiliation forever." Silence flooded the dining room. Then Claire did something unexpected. She cried. Not softly, violently. Tears spilled down her face while her shoulders shook and mascara darkened beneath her eyes. For one dangerous second, instinct pulled at me again. Comfort her, fix it, end this pain. But then she spoke. "Do you have any idea what happens if people find out we're struggling right now? Not I hurt you. Not I'm ashamed. Not I'm sorry. Only fear of exposure. And in that moment, something inside me finally detached completely. Not hatred, clarity. I sat back slowly in my chair. "That's what this is really about," I said. Claire wiped furiously at her tears. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." "How much debt are you in?" Neither answered. My pulse slowed strangely. Because suddenly certain pieces aligned in my head. The constant emergencies, the panic, the obsession with appearances. Then Jason muttered the sentence that changed everything. "We counted on things staying stable until later." I looked at him carefully. Later. Claire's face went pale. Jason realized his mistake immediately. Too late. A cold understanding moved through me with terrifying precision. Inheritance. They had planned around my death. Maybe not consciously at first. Maybe not maliciously in the beginning. But somewhere along the line, my future absence had become part of their financial strategy. I stood slowly from the table. Claire panicked instantly. "Mom, number." The word stopped her cold. For the first time in her life, I saw genuine uncertainty in my daughter's eyes. I picked up my coat calmly. "You know the saddest part," I said quietly. "I would have given both of you almost anything willingly." Claire's face crumpled. But dignity, I continued, was the one thing I didn't realize I'd been paying with. I walked toward the front door while neither of them moved. Behind me, Claire's voice broke. "Mom, please." I paused briefly with my hand on the door. Then I answered without turning around. "You stopped being my safe place a very long time ago." Outside, snow fell silently across the dark driveway while warm light glowed behind me through the windows. And that night, after 23 years without changing it once, I rewrote my will. The lawyer's office smelled like cedarwood and old paper. Margaret Hale kept the thermostat too high, just like Richard used to complain she always did, and by the time she finished reviewing the revised documents with me, the snow on my boots had melted into small, dark puddles beneath the chair. "You're certain about this?" she asked quietly. I looked down at the final page of my updated will. For nearly 20 years, Claire had remained primary beneficiary on almost everything Richard and I built together. Not because she earned it, because she was our daughter. Because love makes permanence feel automatic. Now the documents looked different. Controlled distributions, trust protections, educational provisions strictly for Lily, charitable allocations, conditions, boundaries, adult words for emotional survival. "I'm certain," I said. Margaret studied me carefully over the rim of her glasses. "You don't look angry." "That's because I'm not anymore." And it was true. Anger had burned itself out somewhere between the family dinner and the quiet drive home afterward. What remained now felt cleaner than rage, almost peaceful. Margaret nodded slowly. That's usually when people finally make good decisions. Outside her office window, January snow drifted lazily across downtown Burlington, while pedestrians hurried along icy sidewalks carrying coffee cups and grocery bags beneath gray skies. Ordinary life continuing. That comforted me somehow. When your family breaks your heart, the world doesn't pause to witness it. People still buy bread. Traffic lights still change. Dogs still bark at delivery trucks. There's something strangely healing about realizing your private grief isn't the center of the universe. It means survival remains possible. By the second week of January, Claire's online world had started visibly unraveling. I didn't go looking for it. But social media collapse is difficult to hide when someone has spent years turning their life into public performance. The sponsored posts stopped first. Then came the desperate positivity. Long captions about new beginnings and protecting your peace began appearing beneath filtered family photographs that suddenly looked strained around the edges. Jason disappeared almost entirely from her content. And the comments changed. "You okay? Haven't seen the family lately. Everything all right financially?" People notice more than influencers think they do. One afternoon, while folding laundry beside the television, I received a call from Lily's school. My chest tightened instantly. Mrs. Whitmore, the administrator, asked gently, "We wanted to let you know Lily's tuition account has entered formal delinquency status." I closed my eyes. There it was. The consequence I'd feared most. "Has she been removed from classes?" I asked quietly. "Oh no," the woman said quickly. "Not yet. We're simply reaching out because you've historically handled payments." Historically. Such a polite word for dependence. After hanging up, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the snow beyond the windows while guilt moved through me in slow, painful waves. Not for Claire. For Lily. Always Lily. That evening, I almost transferred the money. My banking app sat open on the coffee table while I argued silently with myself for nearly 20 minutes. Just pay the tuition. None of this is her fault. Don't punish a child. Then Richard's voice surfaced in my memory again. If you keep rescuing adults from consequences, eventually children learn the wrong lesson too. I closed the app. The next morning, Claire called 17 times. 17. By the 12th call, panic had fully replaced anger. By the 17th, she sounded almost hysterical in her voicemail. Mom, please call me back. This is serious now. I still didn't answer. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time in Claire's adult life, reality had finally arrived without me standing between them. And reality, it turned out, was expensive. 3 days later, Jason's luxury SUV was repossessed. I found out because Claire posted an emotional Instagram story about navigating hardship privately, only for one of her neighbors to upload a blurry cell phone video of the tow truck hauling the vehicle away before sunrise. The internet can be cruel in ways families sometimes aren't prepared for. By then, rumors had started circulating online that Jason's consulting business was failing. Brand partnerships quietly disappeared from Claire's page. Her engagement numbers dropped sharply once followers sensed instability behind the polished aesthetic. Perfection attracts audiences. Desperation makes them uncomfortable. Then came the credit card lawsuit. Apparently, one of the accounts I'd stopped quietly subsidizing had ballooned far beyond what I realized. Interest, penalties, missed payments. The illusion finally cracked wide open. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I mostly felt tired. One snowy Friday afternoon, Lily arrived unexpectedly at my house wearing a puffy blue winter coat and carrying an overnight bag almost half her size. Claire stood rigidly behind her on the porch. She wants to stay here this weekend, Claire said flatly. Not would that be okay? Not can you help? Just surrender disguised as practicality. Lily rushed inside before either of us spoke further. I watched my daughter carefully. God, she looked exhausted. Not physically. Soul exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes when someone spends too long performing a life they can no longer afford to maintain. Dark circles shadowed beneath her eyes despite expensive makeup. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, and for the first time in years, Claire looked less like an influencer and more like the frightened young woman who used to call me crying from college apartments at 2 a.m. You could help us, she said quietly. Snow drifted between us in soft white spirals. I did help you. No, Claire snapped suddenly. You controlled us. The accusation stunned me. I stepped onto the porch slowly. Controlled you? You always wanted us dependent on you. For one brief moment, anger finally sparked inside me again. Not because the statement was unfair. Because some small broken part of it contained truth. Had I needed their dependence too? Had being financially necessary become my substitute for emotional closeness? The realization hurt more than I expected. Claire saw something change in my face and immediately looked away. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, "Everything's falling apart." And there it was. Not arrogance, not manipulation. Fear. Real fear. I could have comforted her then. God knows every maternal instinct inside me wanted to. Instead, I asked quietly, "Did you ever love me without needing something from me?" Claire's eyes filled instantly. But this time she didn't answer. Because finally, we both knew the truth was complicated. She left without saying goodbye. That night, Lily and I baked sugar cookies while snowstorm warnings rolled across the local news. Flour covered the countertops. Christmas music played softly through the kitchen. For several hours, the house felt warm again. Before bed, Lily climbed beside me on the couch and asked the question I'd been dreading. Are Mommy and Daddy gonna lose the house? Children always sense more than adults realize. I brushed her hair gently away from her face. I don't know yet, sweetheart. Lily looked down at her hands. Then very quietly she asked, "Did Mommy make you sad?" The room went still. I swallowed carefully. Yes, I admitted. Lily leaned her small head against my shoulder. So why do you still look worried about her? I stared at the snow falling outside the dark windows for a very long time before answering. Because loving someone doesn't always stop the moment they hurt you. Upstairs, the guest room radiator hummed softly through the old house while wind rattled against the windows. And somewhere across town, my daughter's perfect life was finally collapsing under the weight of truth. The snowstorm arrived just after midnight. By morning, Vermont had disappeared beneath nearly a foot of white. Pine branches sagged heavily outside the windows, and the world beyond the house looked soft and strangely suspended, as though time itself had slowed beneath the storm. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, building a puzzle while cinnamon rolls baked in the oven. The television played old cartoons quietly in the background, and for the first time in months, my house sounded alive again. Not loud, just lived in. I was carrying mugs of hot chocolate into the living room when someone knocked on the front door. 3 sharp knocks. Not tentative, not confident either. Tired. Something inside me already knew. I set the mugs down slowly and crossed the foyer while wind hissed faintly against the windows. When I opened the door, Claire stood there alone beneath the falling snow. For one long second, neither of us spoke. She looked nothing like the woman from those polished online videos anymore. No makeup, no styled hair, no carefully curated perfection. Just exhaustion. Real exhaustion. Snow clung to the shoulders of her dark coat while cold wind curled around us through the open doorway. Her eyes looked swollen like she hadn't slept properly in days, and suddenly I saw her differently. Not as the cruel woman from the video, not as the entitled adult who drained me for years, but as someone who had spent so long performing happiness that she no longer recognized herself without the performance. "Lily still here?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Claire nodded once. Then she whispered the words I'd spent weeks wondering whether I would ever hear. "I don't think my marriage is going to survive this." I stepped aside silently. She entered the house, slowly removing her gloves with trembling fingers, while warmth settled around us from the kitchen. Lily looked up from the floor puzzle the moment she heard her mother's voice. "Mommy." Claire dropped to her knees instantly as Lily ran into her arms. And just like that, some invisible wall inside me cracked. Not completely, but enough. I turned away quietly and returned to the kitchen to give them privacy. The cinnamon rolls had finished baking, and I stood at the counter spooning icing across them, while soft voices drifted faintly from the living room. After several minutes, Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway alone. "I told Lily I needed to talk to you." I nodded toward the table. "Sit." She sat slowly, wrapping both hands around the mug of hot chocolate I slid toward her like someone trying to warm herself from the inside out. For a while, neither of us spoke. Snow continued falling steadily outside, while the old clock above the stove ticked softly through the silence. Finally, Claire exhaled shakily. "I think I built my whole life around making people jealous." The honesty startled me. She stared down into the mug while speaking. The house, the vacations, the clothes, the videos. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it before. Every time people admired us online, I felt successful for 5 minutes. I remained quiet. Claire swallowed hard. And then it stopped feeling like enough. There it was. Not greed exactly. Emptiness. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "When did you become so unhappy?" I asked gently. Claire laughed once through her tears. "I honestly don't know." And somehow that answer felt truer than anything else she'd said in years. She told me things slowly after that. Not dramatically, not like a confession scene in a movie. More like someone finally too exhausted to keep carrying lies. Jason's consulting business had been unstable for years. The influencer income fluctuated constantly. Credit card debt piled up quietly while they kept trying to maintain appearances. Every financial problem created another layer of performance designed to hide the previous one. "You know what the worst part is," Claire whispered finally. I waited. "I started resenting you because you reminded me we couldn't actually afford our life without help." The sentence hurt, but not because it shocked me, because I believed her. Claire covered her eyes briefly with one hand. "That video..." Her voice cracked. I sounded horrible. "Yes," I said softly. Tears slipped down her face again. I don't even know why I said it. I did. People become cruel when gratitude starts feeling humiliating. Eventually, dependence transforms into resentment because accepting constant help forces you to confront your own weakness. Richard understood that years ago. Claire looked up at me suddenly. "Did Dad know?" I smiled sadly. "Better than I did." For several moments, snow filled the silence between us. Then I stood slowly and walked toward the hallway cabinet near the stairs. Inside sat a small wooden box Richard had kept for years. I carried it carefully back to the kitchen table and opened it between us. Claire frowned slightly. "What is that?" "A letter." Richard had written it during the final months of his illness, after the doctors quietly admitted treatment was no longer working. I'd found it hidden among his papers 3 weeks earlier. Addressed simply for Eleanor and Claire when the time finally comes. My fingers trembled slightly unfolding the pages. Then I began reading aloud. "If you're hearing this," Richard had written, "then something painful finally forced honesty into this family. Maybe that honesty arrived too late. Maybe not. Claire, your mother loves people by rescuing them. It's the most beautiful thing about her and also the thing most likely to destroy her if nobody protects her from it, including you. And Eleanor, if you're reading this after being hurt by our daughter, remember this carefully. Love without boundaries eventually becomes permission. Real family should survive honesty. If it cannot survive honesty, then what survives was never truly family to begin with. By the time I finished reading, Claire was crying silently into both hands. Not performative tears, not panic. Grief. Real grief. For herself, perhaps, more than anything else. I folded the letter carefully. Claire looked at me through wet eyes. Do you hate me? The question settled heavily between us. I thought carefully before answering. No, I said finally, but I don't trust you right now. Claire nodded slowly like she expected that answer. I don't know how to fix this. Neither did I. But for the first time in months, the conversation no longer felt fake. And sometimes honesty matters more than solutions. I'm not restoring everything I told her gently. The money, the accounts. None of that goes back to the way it was. Claire wiped her face quietly. I know. But I continued, if you genuinely want a relationship with me, not access, not rescue, not dependency, then we can try rebuilding something honest. She stared at me for a long moment before whispering, I'd like that. Outside, snow buried the world in white silence, while warmth filled the kitchen from the oven. A little later, Lily wandered downstairs sleepy and wrapped in blankets, asking whether we still had enough icing left for more cinnamon rolls. Claire laughed softly through tears, and hearing my daughter laugh without pretending for the first time in years nearly broke my heart all over again. That evening after Lily fell asleep upstairs, I stood beside the living room window watching snow drift through the darkness, while Claire quietly washed dishes in the kitchen behind me. Not because she had to, because she wanted to help. The sound alone felt unfamiliar, peaceful, and standing there in the quiet glow of the old house Richard and I built together, I finally understood something that had taken me 63 years to learn. Being needed is not the same thing as being loved. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts below. Have you ever had to choose between helping someone and protecting yourself? And where are you listening from tonight? We share stories like this every day. Stories about family, heartbreak, strength, and finding dignity again after life humbles us. So if you'd like to keep walking this journey with us, subscribe and stay close. There are many more stories waiting for you here.